Imagine lying in a hospital bed, your body broken, the beeping of the monitor, the only sound in the room, and looking up to see the person who swore to love you in sickness and in health, checking his watch with a look of pure disgust. That was Kaylee's reality. Her husband, Brad, didn't just leave her there to die. He laughed as he signed the discharge papers for his own conscience, walking out the door to start a new life with her best friend. He thought Kaylee was finished. He thought she was destitute. But he forgot one thing: the new head of surgery wasn't just a doctor. He was the billionaire brother Kaylee hadn't seen in 10 years, and he had been waiting for a reason to destroy the man who ruined his sister's life. The fluorescent lights of the ICU at St. Benedict's General Hospital in Chicago hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz. To Kaylee Miller, that sound had become the soundtrack of her existence for the last 3 weeks. At 32, she looked 50. Her once vibrant auburn hair was matted against the pillow, her skin pale and translucent, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. She had been admitted after a collapse at work, a severe autoimmune flare-up complicated by a cardiac event. It was serious but treatable, expensive but manageable. Or so she thought. Standing at the foot of her bed wasn't a comforting partner holding her hand. It was Brad Miller, her husband of 5 years, wearing his navy blue Armani suit, looking pristine, smelling of expensive sandalwood cologne, and tapping his foot impatiently. "Brad," Kaylee whispered, her voice raspy from the ventilator she had just been weaned off of yesterday. "Water." Brad didn't move toward the pitcher. Instead, he sighed a long, exaggerated exhalation of air that signaled immense inconvenience. "Kaylee, we need to talk, and I don't have much time. I have a reservation at Le Bernardin at 8. Kaylee blinked, confused. "A reservation? Who are you going with?" Brad finally looked at her, his eyes cold, devoid of the warmth she had fallen in love with back in college. "Jessica, we're celebrating." "Jessica." Kaylee's heart monitor picked up speed. Beep, beep, beep. Jessica was her maid of honor, her college roommate. "Celebrating what?" "My promotion," Brad said, smoothing his tie. "And my freedom." The air left the room. Kaylee tried to sit up, but her muscles were atrophied. "What are you saying?" Brad reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a get-well card. He pulled out a thick, folded document and tossed it onto the blanket covering her legs. It landed with a heavy thud. "Divorce papers," Brad stated flatly. "I've already signed. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, says given your condition and your inability to work, you're essentially a liability. I'm not going to drain my bank account, keeping you on life support, Kaylee. It's bad ROI. ROI. Kaylee choked out, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm your wife, Brad. I worked 2 jobs so you could get your MBA. I paid off your student loans. I sacrificed my relationship with my family for you. And look where that got you." Brad sneered, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "You're broken, Kaylee. Look at you. You're a sinkhole. Jessica, she's vibrant. She's healthy. She's a partner, not a patient. I cancelled your private insurance this morning. It takes effect at midnight. You're on state aid now. Good luck." He turned on his heel, the squeak of his expensive leather shoes echoing on the linoleum. "Brad!" she screamed, the sound tearing at her throat. "You can't just leave me here. I have no one." Brad paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He didn't look back. "You should have thought about that before you got sick. Goodbye, Kaylee." The door clicked shut. Kaylee lay there, the silence rushing back in heavier than before. The man she had given everything to, the man she had chosen over her own flesh and blood a decade ago, had just discarded her like a broken toy. She had no money, no insurance, and thanks to a fight 10 years ago, where she defended Brad's potential against her controlling older brother, she had no family. She was completely, utterly alone. 2 days passed. They were the longest 48 hours of Kaylee's life. Without Brad's premium insurance, the hospital administration's attitude shifted drastically. She was moved from a private room with a view of the skyline to a cramped shared room near the elevator where the noise was constant. The nurses, previously attentive, now seemed overworked and scarce. Kaylee lay staring at the ceiling, the divorce papers still unopened on the bedside table. She hadn't eaten. She felt her strength fading, not just physically, but spiritually. She was ready to let go. Why fight? Brad was right. She was broken. Mrs. Miller. The voice was sharp, officious. A hospital administrator, Mrs. Higgins, stood at the door with a clipboard. "It's just Kaylee now," she whispered. "Right. Kaylee." Mrs. Higgins adjusted her glasses. "We have a problem. Your coverage has been denied for the specialized cardiac treatment you need. The state aid covers the bed and basic maintenance, but the surgery, it's elective under their guidelines." "Elective?" Kaylee laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "My heart is failing. It's deemed quality of life improvement, not immediate emergency life-saving according to Code 44B, Mrs. Higgins recited robotically. "Unless you can provide a deposit of $50,000 by tomorrow morning, we're going to have to discharge you to a hospice facility." Hospice, a waiting room for death. "I don't have $50,000, Kaylee said, tears sliding down her cheeks into her ears. "I have nothing, Mrs." Higgins looked sympathetic for a brief second, before hardening her expression. "I'm sorry. We need the bed. You have until 10:00 a.m. As the administrator left, a commotion erupted in the hallway. It wasn't the usual code blue alarm or the sound of a gurney rushing by. It was a different kind of energy, hushed whispers, the sound of many footsteps, trying to keep up with one person, an air of reverence. "He's here," a nurse whispered loudly outside the curtain. "I heard the board of directors flew him in from Zurich personally." "Dr. Blackwood," another voice gasped. "The guy who invented the Neuralink valve, I thought he only took private clients in the Swiss Alps. Apparently he bought a stake in the hospital. He's the new chief of medicine. He's doing rounds on the charity cases first. Some PR stunt, probably." Kaylee closed her eyes. She didn't care about some hotshot billionaire doctor. She just wanted the pain in her chest to stop. The curtain to her shared room was ripped back. The light from the hallway flooded in, silhouetting a tall, broad-shouldered figure. He was flanked by 3 nervous-looking residents and the terrified Mrs. Higgins. "This is the patient, Dr. Blackwood," Mrs. Higgins stammered. "Terminal breakdown of the arterial walls. But as I was explaining, she lacks the funding for the reconstruction. We are processing her transfer to hospice tomorrow." The man stepped into the room. He was imposing, wearing a charcoal grey suit under a pristine white coat that looked tailored. He didn't look at the chart. He looked straight at Kaylee. Kaylee, squinting against the light, turned her head. He had steel grey eyes, a sharp jawline covered in a day's worth of stubble, and a small, jagged scar just above his left eyebrow, a scar she remembered from a bicycle accident when he was 12. The room stopped spinning. The air froze. Kaylee's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan!" The residents gasped. Patients didn't call Dr. Blackwood by his first name. The man didn't flinch. He walked slowly to the side of her bed, ignoring the beeping monitors, ignoring the stench of the cheap disinfectant. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable, terrifyingly stoic. "Leave us," the man said. His voice was deep, commanding, leaving no room for argument. "But Dr. Protocol dictates," Mrs. Higgins started. "I bought the protocol when I bought the wing," he snapped, not looking away from Kaylee. "Get out, all of you." They scrambled out like frightened mice, pulling the curtain shut. Ethan Blackwood stood over her. He looked different than the angry 22-year-old she had screamed at 10 years ago. He looked powerful, dangerous, wealthy beyond comprehension. "Hello, Kaylee," he said softly. You're Dr. Blackwood." Kaylee stammered, her mind struggling to connect the dots. "But your name is Ethan Miller." "I changed it," he said, pulling up a chair and sitting down, his intense gaze scanning her frail form. "After you left, after Mom and Dad died, I didn't see a point in keeping a name that belonged to a broken family. I took Grandfather's middle name, Blackwood." "I didn't know," Kaylee sobbed. "I didn't know you were a doctor. I thought you were still in Europe traveling." "I was studying, building, acquiring," Ethan said. He reached out and, with a gentleness that contradicted his imposing size, took her hand. His thumb brushed over her ring finger. He noticed the pale band of skin where her wedding ring used to be. "Where is he?" "Kaylee." Ethan's voice dropped an octave, the temperature in the room plummeting. "Where is the man you told me was worth more than blood? Where is Brad?" Kaylee turned her face away, shame burning her cheeks hotter than the fever. "He left Ethan. He left me here 2 days ago. He's with Jessica now." There was a silence so profound it felt heavy. Then Kaylee heard the sound of Ethan's free hand curling into a fist, the leather of his glove creaking under the pressure. "He left you to die?" Ethan asked, his voice calm, too calm. It was the calm of a predator before the strike. "He said I was a bad ROI, Kaylee whispered. Ethan stood up abruptly. He walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he turned back, the look in his eyes wasn't just brotherly concern. It was cold, calculated fury. "Mrs. Higgins said you're being discharged tomorrow," Ethan said. "I have no money, Ethan. I can't pay you." Ethan walked back to the bed. He pressed a button on the wall, the emergency summons for the nursing station. "You aren't going to pay a dime, Kaylee," he said, his voice hard as iron. "And you aren't going to hospice. You are going to the presidential suite on the top floor. You are going to get the surgery. And Brad." A dark, terrifying smile touched the corners of his lips. "Brad is going to learn that ROI works both ways." The door burst open. The head nurse rushed in. "Dr. Blackwood, is she crashing?" "No," Ethan said, smoothing his white coat. "But her status has changed. Transfer her to the Blackwood wing immediately. Prepare the OR for tomorrow morning. I'll be performing the surgery myself." "But billing?" the nurse asked, confused. "Bill it to me," Ethan said, staring at his sister. "And get legal on the phone. I want to know everything about a man named Brad Miller. I want his bank accounts, his credit score, his employment contract, and the license plate of his car on my desk in 1 hour." He leaned down and kissed Kaylee on the forehead. "Sleep, Kaylee. Your big brother is home." The surgery took 14 hours. It was a marathon of medical precision that made headlines in the local medical journals, though the patient's name was kept anonymous. When Kaylee finally floated back to consciousness, She didn't wake up to the sound of beeping machines or the smell of antiseptic. She woke up to the smell of fresh lilies and the feeling of Egyptian cotton sheets. She blinked her eyes open. The room was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. There was a mahogany desk in the corner, a plush velvet sofa, and paintings on the wall that looked suspiciously like originals. "Welcome back to the land of the living," a deep voice rumbled. Ethan was sitting in a leather armchair near the window reading a tablet. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, but he smiled when he saw her awake. "Am I in heaven?" Kaylee croaked. "No, you're in the penthouse suite of the Blackwood wing." Ethan stood up and poured her a glass of water from a crystal carafe. "I told you I don't do things by halves." Over the next 2 weeks, Kaylee's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. With the best physical therapists, a private chef designed to boost her immune system, and the cutting-edge medication Ethan had developed, her color returned. Her hair regained its shine. The hollow look in her cheeks filled out. But while her body healed, her mind was still trapped in that ICU room with Brad. One afternoon, while Ethan was checking her vitals, Kaylee asked the question that had been haunting her. "Ethan, how did you become this?" She gestured around the room. "We grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Ohio. Dad was a mechanic." Ethan finished wrapping the blood pressure cuff. "I was angry, Kaylee. When you chose Brad, when you cut me off because I told you he was a narcissist, I channeled that rage. I went to Europe on a scholarship. I developed a synthetic valve for pediatric hearts. I patented it. Then I invested in biotech. 1 million turned into 10, 10 into 100. Now, well, let's just say I can buy and sell Brad's entire existence before lunch." Kaylee looked down at her hands. "I should have listened to you. You saw it. I was just so blind. I wanted to be loved so badly that I ignored every red flag." "He manipulated you," Ethan said firmly. "That's what predators do." Ethan walked to the mahogany desk and picked up a thick file folder. He tossed it onto her bed. "Speaking of predators," Ethan said, his voice hardening, "this is what your husband has been up to while you were in surgery." Kaylee opened the folder. It was a dossier. Photos, bank statements, text logs. There was a photo of Brad and Jessica on a boat in Miami taken 3 days ago. Brad was laughing, holding a glass of champagne. Jessica was wearing a diamond bracelet, a bracelet Kaylee recognized. It was her grandmother's. Brad had told Kaylee it was lost during a move 2 years ago. "He stole it," Kaylee whispered, her hand trembling. "He told me the movers stole it." "He pawned the rest of your jewelry," Ethan explained, pointing to a receipt. "He used the money to put a down payment on a condo in the Marina district. In his name only. And Jessica. She's currently driving your car. They repainted it black." Rage, hot and unfamiliar, began to bubble up in Kaylee's chest. It wasn't the sorrow she had felt in the hospital. This was something different. It was fuel. "He thinks I'm dead," Kaylee said quietly, "or dying in a state facility." "He thinks you are a non-factor," Ethan corrected. "He sent a text to his lawyer yesterday, asking if he could legally claim your life insurance policy if you die within 30 days of the divorce decree." Kaylee closed the folder. She looked up at her brother, her eyes dry. "I don't want to just survive, Ethan." Ethan smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that matched the wolfish glint in his eyes. "Good. Because I didn't save your life just so you could watch Netflix. I saved you so we could settle the score." He pulled out a sleek black smartphone and handed it to her. "Step 1, Ethan said. You need to disappear, officially. As far as the world knows, Kaylee Miller is in a coma in a hospice in rural Illinois. But Kaylee Blackwood, she's about to make her debut." 3 months passed. Brad Miller was living the dream. Or so he told himself every morning when he looked in the mirror. He had been promoted to regional VP of sales at Apex Logistics. He had a stunning girlfriend, Jessica, who looked great on his arm at corporate dinners. He had a sleek condo overlooking the marina. Sure, the credit card debt was piling up a bit faster than he liked. Jessica had expensive taste, and maintaining the VP lifestyle wasn't cheap, but he was expecting a massive quarterly bonus. "Babe," Jessica called out from the bathroom, applying her makeup. "Are you sure we can afford the trip to St. Bart's next month? My card got declined at the salon today. It was embarrassing." Brad adjusted his tie, feeling a prickle of annoyance. "It's a glitch, Jess. I'll call the bank. And yes, we're going. I'm closing the Kincaid deal next week. That's a $50,000 commission." He checked his phone. An email from his boss, Gary. Subject, urgent meeting. "Brad, come to my office immediately. New ownership." Brad frowned. New ownership, Apex Logistics, had been privately held for 40 years. He grabbed his jacket and drove to the office. The atmosphere in the bullpen was tense. People were whispering, huddled around computers. When Brad walked into the conference room, Gary looked pale. Sitting at the head of the table wasn't the old CEO, Mr. Henderson. It was a man Brad didn't recognize. A man named Gavin Thorne, wearing a suit that cost more than Brad's car. "Brad, sit down," Gary said nervously. "What's going on?" Brad asked, putting on his best confident smile. "Who is this?" "This is Mr. Thorne," Gary said. "He represents the investment firm that just acquired Apex. They're restructuring." Gavin Thorne didn't smile. He opened a file in front of him. "Mr. Miller, I've been reviewing your accounts. Your expense reports are creative." Brad's heart skipped a beat. He had been padding his expenses for years. Dinners with Jessica listed as client meetings, weekends away listed as conferences. Everyone did it. "I bring in the most revenue for this sector," Brad said defensively. "My results speak for themselves." "Your results are adequate," Gavin said coldly. "But the new ownership values integrity above all else. We are auditing all senior management." "Auditing." Brad's sweat began to prickle his hairline. "Is that necessary?" "Mandatory," Gavin said. "However, the owners are willing to overlook past indiscretions if you can secure the exclusive contract with the Helios Medical Group. They are building a new facility in Chicago and need a logistics partner. It's a $10 million contract." Brad's eyes widened. $10 million. His commission would be huge. It would solve everything. It would pay off the condo, the cards, everything. "I can do it," Brad said eagerly. "I can sell ice to an Eskimo. Who's the contact?" "You'll meet them at the Helios Charity Gala this Saturday," Gavin said, sliding a heavy gold-embossed envelope across the table. "This is your invitation. It costs $5,000 a plate, which the company has paid for. Do not screw this up, Mr. Miller. Your future and your freedom, considering the fraud in your expense reports, depends on it." Brad swallowed hard, taking the envelope. "I won't let you down." He walked out of the office, his legs shaking. He didn't know that Gavin Thorne was Ethan Blackwood's right-hand man. He didn't know that the Helios Medical Group was a subsidiary of Blackwood Enterprises, and he certainly didn't know that the owner demanding integrity was the brother of the wife he had left to rot. That night, Brad went home and told Jessica they were going to the most exclusive event of the year. "I need a new dress," Jessica squealed. "Put it on the Amex," Brad said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We have to look rich to get rich right." Little did he know he was walking straight into the lion's den. The Helios Charity Gala was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel. It was an event dripping with old money. Chandeliers the size of small cuss hung from the gold-leafed ceiling. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Brad and Jessica arrived in a rented limousine. Jessica wore a sparkling red dress that was a bit too tight and a bit too loud for the conservative crowd, but she looked beautiful. Brad wore a tuxedo he had rented, trying to look like he belonged. But from the moment they stepped in, Brad felt small. The men here weren't just regional VPs. They were senators, oil tycoons, tech moguls. "God, look at those diamonds," Jessica whispered, eyeing a woman near the bar. "Brad, you have to close this deal. I want to live like this." "I will," Brad hissed. "Just smile and don't drink too much." They mingled for an hour, but Brad was ignored by almost everyone. He felt invisible. He kept scanning the room for anyone from Helios Medical. Suddenly the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced, "please welcome the chairman of Helios Medical and the host of this evening, Dr. Ethan Blackwood." Brad froze. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Ethan walked onto the stage. He was breathtakingly handsome, in a bespoke tuxedo, radiating power and charisma. The room erupted in applause. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice smooth as silk. "Tonight is about second chances. It's about healing hearts that have been broken, literally and metaphorically." Brad frowned. "That guy. He looks familiar." "He's hot," Jessica giggled, sipping her third martini. "Tonight," Ethan continued, "I want to introduce you to the inspiration behind our new cardiac wing. A woman who faced death with dignity, even when she was abandoned by those who swore to protect her. My sister, and the new CEO of the Helios Foundation. Kaylee Blackwood." Brad dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the silent room. Champagne splashed onto his rented shoes. The curtain behind Ethan rose. Kaylee stood there. She was unrecognizable from the frail woman in the hospital bed. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald green silk that hugged her restored figure perfectly. Her auburn hair cascaded in waves over her shoulders. She wore a necklace of diamonds and emeralds that caught the spotlight jewelry that looked heavy, expensive, and regal. She looked like a queen. She walked down the stairs, her chin high, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto one specific spot. She locked eyes with Brad. Brad felt like he had been punched in the gut. "Kaylee," he mouthed, no sound coming out. That's Kaylee." Jessica gasped, her face draining of color. "But you said she was dying. You said she was on state aid." Kaylee took the microphone from her brother. Her voice was strong, resonant. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, never breaking eye contact with Brad. 6 months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, told I was a bad investment. I was told I was a liability. But tonight I stand here as proof that you should never underestimate the value of a human life." The crowd applauded politely, unaware of the tension vibrating in the air. Kaylee smiled a cold, dazzling smile. "I would like to personally welcome some of our guests, specifically those who are here to do business with us." She walked off the stage and into the crowd, the spotlight following her. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. She walked straight toward Brad and Jessica. Brad couldn't move. His feet were lead. Kaylee stopped 2 feet away from him. Up close, she was even more intimidating. She smelled of expensive perfume and success. "Hello, Brad," she said calmly. "Kaylee." Brad stammered, his charm failing him completely. You look amazing. I heard you recovered. I've been so worried." "Worried?" Kaylee raised an eyebrow. "Is that why you never called? Or is that why you're wearing my grandmother's watch?" She pointed to his wrist. In his haste to look rich, Brad had put on an old vintage Rolex he had found in Kaylee's jewelry box before he left. Jessica stepped back, trying to hide behind Brad. "And Jessica," Kaylee said, turning her gaze to her former best friend. "That shade of red is lovely. It reminds me of the blood I coughed up the night you two went out to celebrate Brad's promotion." A hush fell over the immediate circle of people. "Kaylee, please," Brad whispered, noticing people staring. "Not here. Let's talk. I can explain. The divorce, it was a mistake. I was scared. I wasn't thinking straight." "Oh, I think you were thinking very clearly, Brad," Kaylee said, her voice raising just enough for the surrounding billionaires to hear. "You were thinking about your ROI, your return on investment." Ethan appeared at Kaylee's side, towering over Brad. "And now," Ethan said, his voice low and menacing, "we are thinking about ours. Mr. Miller," Ethan continued, "I believe you are here to bid on the Helios logistics contract." "Yes," Brad said, seizing the lifeline. "Yes, Dr. Blackwood, my company Apex. We just bought Apex this morning," Ethan interrupted smoothly. "Well, a holding company of mine did." Brad's mouth fell open. "What, we own it," Kaylee clarified, "which means, Brad, I'm your boss." She took a sip of champagne from a passing tray and smiled over the rim of the glass. "And we need to have a very serious performance review. In my office, Monday morning." Kaylee turned her back on him. "Come on, Ethan. I think I see the senator." They walked away, leaving Brad standing in a puddle of spilled champagne, surrounded by the elite of Chicago, who were now whispering and pointing at the man who had just been publicly castrated by his own wife. Jessica tugged on his arm. "Brad, we have to go. Everyone is looking at us." Brad looked at Kaylee's retreating figure. He didn't feel fear anymore. He felt desperation. He saw the diamonds, the power, the way the room bowed to her, and his narcissism kicked in. "She's my wife," he thought. "The divorce isn't final yet." The papers were signed but not filed by the court because of the backlog. He wasn't ruined. He was married to a billionaire. "No," Brad whispered, a sick grin forming on his face. "We're staying. She's just playing hard to get. She still loves me. I can fix this." He had no idea that Monday morning wasn't going to be a performance review. It was going to be an execution. Monday morning arrived draped in a suffocating gray fog that rolled off Lake Michigan, swallowing the peaks of the Chicago skyscrapers. Down on the street, the wind was biting the kind of cold that seeped through wool coats and settled in the bones. But inside the climate-controlled lobby of the Apex Logistics Tower, Brad Miller felt nothing but the warm golden glow of impending victory. He breezed through the revolving doors, checking his reflection in the glass. His suit was pressed to military precision, his hair coiffed, his smile practiced. In his left hand, he carried a bouquet of 24 long-stemmed baccara roses, deep red velvety and obscenely expensive. They were a calculated investment, a prop for the scene he had rehearsed in his head 1,000 times over the weekend. He walked up to the reception desk, tapping his knuckles on the marble. "Good morning, Brenda." He beamed, flashing his teeth. "Is the new ownership team settled in upstairs?" "Brenda." A woman who usually greeted him with a warm smile and an update on her grandkids didn't look up. Her eyes were glued to her monitor, her posture stiff. When she finally acknowledged him, it was with a look Brad couldn't quite place, a mixture of pity and repulsion. "They are waiting for you in the main boardroom, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice tight. "They left instructions for you to go straight up." "Excellent." Brad winked, oblivious to the chill in the room. "Big day, Brenda. Big changes coming." He stepped into the elevator and hit the button for the penthouse floor. As the numbers ticked upward, Brad adjusted his tie. He had spent the last 48 hours doing his homework. He had Googled Blackwood assets and marital property laws in Illinois. His logic was ironclad. Kaylee was a Blackwood. They were legally married. Therefore, even if she wanted a divorce, he was entitled to a massive settlement. And if she wanted to keep her precious reputation clean, she would pay him to go away quietly. Or even better, the power couple angle. He could convince her that he was the only man who could handle her new status. He would frame his affair with Jessica as a cry for help, a temporary lapse caused by the stress of her illness. He could sell anything. He was Brad Miller. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. The hallway to the executive suite had changed. The old dusty paintings of ships were gone, replaced by stark modern art. The nameplate on the double-glass doors no longer said CEO. It read, Office of the Chairman. Brad pushed the doors open, a confident greeting already forming on his lips. "Kaylee, I just wanted to—" The words died in his throat. He had expected a private meeting. Maybe Kaylee sitting behind the desk looking conflicted. Instead, the massive boardroom looked less like an office and more like a tribunal. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a severe artificial light. At the head of the 20-foot mahogany table sat Kaylee. She looked nothing like the woman he had abandoned. She was wearing a navy blue suit that was tailored within an inch of its life, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her face was a mask of terrifying neutrality. To her right sat Ethan, slouching slightly in his chair, tapping a heavy silver pen against the table. To her left was Gavin Thorne, the man who had audited the company, along with 3 other men in identical grey suits who radiated the predatory energy of high-priced corporate litigation. But it was the person sitting in the corner that made Brad's stomach drop. Sitting on a folding metal chair away from the table was Jessica. She wasn't wearing her usual designer flash. She was wearing a grey tracksuit, no makeup, and her eyes were red and swollen. She was hugging her knees, rocking slightly. "Babe?" Brad frowned the heavy bouquet of roses, suddenly feeling like a lead weight in his hand. "Jess, what are you doing here?" Jessica looked up, her lower lip trembling, but she didn't speak. She just looked at Kaylee, terrified. "Sit down, Brad," Kaylee said. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. Her voice was quiet, calm, and carried the absolute authority of a gavel striking wood. Brad hesitated, then placed the roses on the far end of the table. They looked ridiculous there, a splash of desperate romance against a wall of legal hostility. He pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, sitting so he was facing Kaylee directly. "Okay," Brad said, letting out a nervous chuckle, trying to summon the salesman within. "This is a bit of a heavy committee for a Monday morning, isn't it? Kaylee, look. Before we get into the business side, I think we need to clear the air personally. I know things got messy. I know I made mistakes. But seeing you on Saturday, it woke me up." He leaned forward, putting on his most sincere face, the one he used to close 6-figure logistics deals. "We have history, Kaylee. 5 years. You can't just throw that away because of a rough patch. I was scared when you got sick. I panicked. I'm human. but I'm willing to forgive the deception about your family. I mean, you lied to me for a decade about being a billionaire if you're willing to forgive my moment of weakness." Ethan stopped tapping his pen. He let out a snort of laughter that was sharp and cruel. "Forgive the deception. You think that's the leverage you have here?" "It's a valid point," Brad shot back, feeling a surge of defensive anger. "Trust goes both ways." Kaylee didn't blink. She slowly interlaced her fingers on the table. "Brad, do you know what a forensic audit is?" Brad's smile faltered. "We talked about this with Gavin. Expense reports. Everyone pads a little. It's part of the compensation package in this industry. We aren't talking about padding a steak dinner or expensing a flight upgrade." Gavin spoke up. He slid a thick bound document across the polished mahogany. It stopped inches from Brad's hand. The cover read, "Independent Financial Investigation. Bradley Miller, Apex Logistics." "We are talking about systematic embezzlement," Gavin continued, his voice dry and factual. "Wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny." Brad picked up the document. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. He opened it to a random page. It was a copy of a check he recognized. "You created 3 shell vendors," Kaylee said, reciting the facts from memory, her eyes boring into his. "J&B Consulting, Miller Supply Solutions, and BHM Logistics. Over the last 24 months, you have approved invoices from these fake companies for services that were never rendered, consulting fees, warehouse rentals that don't exist, shipping containers that were never leased." That's a misunderstanding," Brad stammered, sweat prickling his hairline. "Those are legitimate contractors. I use them for off-book overflow." "We checked the addresses, Brad," Ethan said. Leaning forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "J&B Consulting is registered to your mother's basement in Ohio. Miller Supply is the address of that condo you just bought in the Marina District. And BHM Logistics." Ethan pointed the silver pen at the corner of the room. "The bank account for BHM is joint owned by you and Jessica." Brad whipped his head toward Jessica. You gave them the accounts." Jessica burst into tears, her face crumbling. "They have the IP logs, Brad." "They traced the transfers. They told me they'd give me immunity if I testified against you. I'm sorry I can't go to jail. I'm too pretty for jail." "Brad." The room spun. The VP lifestyle. The condo with the view. The trips to St. Bart's. The jewelry. It was all built on a house of cards, and Kaylee had just pulled the bottom one out. "You've siphoned off nearly $450,000 from Apex," Kaylee said, her voice turning icy. "You stole from the company, and since my holding firm acquired Apex entirely on Friday, you didn't just steal from a corporation. You stole from me." Brad stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair over with a crash. Panic cold and primal clawed at his throat. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm your husband. Spousal privilege. You can't testify against me. It's a conflict of interest." "Sit down, Mr. Miller," one of the grey-suited lawyers said, looking bored. "First, spousal privilege does not apply when the crime is committed against the spouse or their financial assets. Second, we don't need Kaylee's testimony. We have the bank records. We have the falsified invoices with your signature. And we have your mistress who has already signed a sworn affidavit detailing the scheme." Brad slumped against the table, his legs giving out. He looked at the roses he had brought. They mocked him. "Kaylee, please," Brad begged, his charm gone replaced by raw desperation. Tears streamed down his face. "I'm sick. I have a spending problem. It's an addiction. I need help, not prison. Don't send me to federal prison. I'll pay it back. I swear. I'll work for free. I'll sell the condo." Kaylee stood up slowly. She walked around the long table, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She stopped right in front of him. He smelled her perfume, sandalwood, and jasmine. It was the smell of power. "You'll pay it back?" she asked softly, tilting her head. "Yes, every cent. Just give me time." "With what money, Brad?" Kaylee asked. "I froze your assets this morning at 9:00 a.m. The condo is currently being seized by the authorities to pay back the company. Your car has been repossessed from the parking garage downstairs. Your credit cards have been terminated. You have nothing." "Then, just let me go," Brad sobbed, grabbing the edge of her jacket. She stepped back, looking at his hand with disgust. "Just let us divorce. I'll sign anything. I won't ask for a settlement. Just let me walk away." Kaylee's expression shifted. A small, cold smile touched her lips. It was the first emotion she had shown since he walked in. "You already signed the papers, Brad," she whispered. "Remember in the ICU, you threw them on my legs because you couldn't be bothered to hand them to me. You said I was a bad ROI. But they weren't filed." Brad grasped at the straw, his eyes wide and manic. "The courts are backed up. We're still married. You have a duty." "Oh, they were filed," Kaylee interrupted. "My legal team is very efficient. We filed an emergency motion this morning due to cruelty, abandonment, and criminal misconduct. The judge granted an expedited decree." She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. "We have been divorced for exactly 52 minutes. Brad's knees finally gave way. He slid down to the floor, collapsing in a heap of expensive wool and despair. He looked up at her, seeing not his wife, but a titan he had foolishly tried to crush. "But I have one last gift for you," Kaylee said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small, crumpled yellow piece of paper. Brad squinted through his tears. It was the receipt from the hospital cafeteria for a coffee and a bagel that he had left on her bedside table the day he walked out. The day he told her she was too expensive to keep alive. "You talked so much about ROI," Kaylee said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "Return on investment. You invested in cruelty, Brad. You invested in greed. You bet against me." She dropped the crumpled receipt. It fluttered down and landed on his chest. "And now, you're collecting your returns." She nodded to the back of the room. The service doors opened. 2 police officers and a federal agent walked in. "Bradley Miller," the agent barked. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion." As the officers hauled Brad to his feet, he struggled, looking around the room for a lifeline. He looked at Jessica, but she had buried her face in her hands. He looked at Ethan, who was smiling with grim satisfaction. He looked at Kaylee. "Kaylee, please, I loved you," he screamed as the metal cuffs clicked shut on his wrists, biting into his skin. "Doesn't that mean anything? I loved you." Kaylee didn't flinch. She reached out and picked up the bouquet of 24 red roses. She brought them to her nose, inhaled deeply, and then walked over to the metal trash can in the corner. With a definitive thud, she dropped the roses into the bin. "Get him out of my building," she said, turning her back on him to look out of the window at the grey Chicago sky. As the heavy doors closed behind the screaming man, the room fell silent. Kaylee took a deep breath, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt her lungs fill completely. She wasn't just breathing. She was finally free 1 year later. The Chicago winter was unforgiving that year. The wind howled off the frozen surface of Lake Michigan, rattling the windows of the skyscrapers and burying the streets in drifts of dirty grey slush. But inside the newly inaugurated Cayley Blackwood Heart Centre, the atmosphere was one of perpetual spring. The new wing of the hospital was a marvel of modern architecture, a cathedral of glass, light, and living greenery, designed to heal not just the body, but the spirit. It was the exact opposite of the sterile, noisy, cramped room where Carly had once lain waiting to die. Cayley walked through the atrium, the heels of her boots clicking rhythmically on the polished terrazzo floor. She wasn't just a donor whose name was etched on a brass plaque by the door. She was the executive director. She was there every day, ensuring that the cruelty she had experienced was never repeated within these walls. She paused at the intake desk, where a young woman was arguing tearfully with a billing specialist. Cayley recognized the look of panic in the woman's eyes, the terror of realizing that your life has a price tag you cannot afford. "Marie," Cayley said softly, stepping up to the desk. "What's the issue here?" "Ms. Blackwood." The receptionist straightened up. "Mrs. Alvarez's insurance has a gap. They won't cover the pre-op screening for her daughter." Cayley looked at the mother, then at the little girl hiding behind her leg. "Code it under the Blackwood grant," Cayley said, signing the clipboard without hesitation. "Full coverage, and get them a private room." As the mother dissolved into tears of gratitude, Cayley offered a gentle smile and continued to the elevators. This was her therapy. Every life she saved was a brick in the wall she was building against her past. She took the private elevator to the roof garden. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe. The terrace was heated, keeping the snow at bay, and offered a panoramic view of the city she now practically owned. She walked to the railing, wrapping her cashmere coat tighter against the chill. "I had a feeling I'd find you up here." Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He walked out, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He looked different too, less like the angry, vengeful protector, and more like a man who had finally found peace. He handed her a cup. "You're working too hard," he said, though the pride in his eyes betrayed his words. "You have a board of directors for a reason, Cayley." "I like the work," she replied, taking a sip. "It keeps the ghosts away." Ethan leaned against the railing beside her, looking out at the skyline. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. It looked stark against his dark wool coat. "This came to the legal department this morning," Ethan said, "from the state penitentiary." Cayley's hand tightened slightly around her coffee cup. "From him?" "No." Ethan shook his head. "From the warden. Apparently inmate 8940 Brad attempted to file for an early appeal based on insufficient legal counsel during his trial. He claimed he was coerced into his confession." Carly stared at the envelope. "And denied with prejudice," Ethan said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence. The forensic audit, the wire transfers Jessica's testimony. He's serving the full 15 years, Cayley. Not a day less. Does he ask about me?" Cayley asked quietly. She hated that she still wondered, but the heart is a stubborn muscle. It doesn't unlearn 5 years of marriage overnight. "In the beginning, the letters were constant," Ethan admitted. "He wrote begging for money, for a better lawyer. He tried to gaslight you from a jail cell, saying he did it all for us, that he was trying to build a future." Ethan paused, watching the steam rise from his cup. "Now the letters have stopped. He mostly just sits in the common room staring at the TV. I heard from a guard that he tells the other inmates he used to run this city. He tells them his wife is a billionaire who's coming to get him any day now. They call him the CEO. It's a joke to them." Cayley looked out at the grey horizon. She tried to summon the anger that had fueled her through the divorce, the fire that had burned in the boardroom. But she found only ash. The hate was gone, replaced by a profound, distant pity. And Jessica moved back to Arizona, Ethan said dismissively. She's working double shifts at a diner. She tried to sell her story to a tabloid last month, the billionaire's ex-husband and me, but nobody bought it. It's old news. She's irrelevant. Kaylee took a deep breath of the crisp, cold air. It filled her lungs, sharp and clean. "You know," she said softly. "When he left me in that room, when he threw those papers on my legs, I prayed to die. I really did. I thought my value was zero. I thought I was exactly what he said I was, a bad investment." Ethan put a protective arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You were never a bad investment, Kaylee. You were just in the wrong portfolio." Kaylee laughed, a genuine bright sound that seemed to scatter the gloom of the winter day. "He didn't end my life, Ethan," she said, realizing the truth of it for the first time. "He saved it. If he hadn't left me, I would have stayed small. I would have stayed blind. He cleared the space for the life I was actually meant to live." She turned away from the railing, turning her back on the city, on the past, and on the man rotting in a 6x8 concrete cell 3 hours south. "Come on," she said, opening the door back to the warmth of the hospital. "We have a strategy meeting. I want to expand the pediatric cardiology unit. It's going to cost you a fortune." Ethan laughed, a deep, booming sound. "I expect nothing less. After all, it's the only ROI that matters." They walked back inside together, the heavy glass doors sliding shut behind them, sealing out the cold, leaving Brad Miller to the winter he had created for himself. And that is the incredible story of Kaylee Miller. Brad thought he was discarding a broken liability, but he was actually throwing away a diamond to chase after cheap costume jewelry. He learned the hard way that loyalty is the only currency that really matters, and when you bankrupt your integrity, no amount of money can bail you out. This story reminds us that sometimes rock bottom is just the solid foundation you need to build a skyscraper. What do you think? Did Brad deserve a harsher punishment, or is 15 years of knowing what he lost the ultimate torture? And if you were, Kaylee, would you have read his letters or burned them unopened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, karma, and rising from the ashes, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who needs a reminder of their own worth, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.